afternoon. It's an honor to speak here at Davidson's Academy today. Today I'm going to talk about human-powered adventure and why I think you should consider it as a way to experience the natural world. I grew up in Alaska in the 70s. My childhood included a lot of time spent in the Alaskan wilderness. I had no idea at the time, but my sense of wilderness would be much different than that of someone who grew up in Burlington, Vermont, for example. My idea of wilderness was influenced by going on fly-out fishing trips with my father. To this day, I can remember floating on the Talchilitna River, and for more than a week, I saw no power lines, airstrips, cabins, clear cuts, or mines. Essentially a landscape devoid of our improvements. Little did I know then that this was an exception. Alaska is a large state, and its wilderness tracts are similarly large. Most are undeveloped. This is a sharp contrast with an experience I had later in life while living in Vermont. At the time, I was working for the Green Mountain Club as a summit steward on Mount Abe, which has rare alpine vegetation. My duties included visiting with hikers and sharing the importance of this relatively small alpine zone, which is a remnant from the last ice age over 10,000 years ago. One afternoon, I was visiting with some hikers, and one of them looked off the ridge down in the valley below and remarked that he had never seen so much wilderness. Now, the view into the valley below was marked by roads and homes as far as the eye could see. While the view was beautiful in its own way from this mountain, it isn't what I would consider wilderness by a long shot. Our ideas of wilderness are clearly influenced by what our perception of what wilderness is. Maybe if I'd been raised in a more urban area as a child, I would agree with this young man. This is not to say his idea of wilderness was wrong. I too can see beauty in what I would consider more as agrarian splendor or even in urban environments. However, it is important to realize in the context of this discussion of human-powered adventure that I have a very high standard for what I consider to be wilderness. In 2002, I was still rocking the same look. Just prior to the exchange I had on Mount Abe with this young man, I had taken my first long-distance hike along the 273-mile Long Trail. The Long Trail was a vision of James P. Taylor, who conceived the idea of a long trail running along the spine of the Green Mountains from the Massachusetts state line to the Canadian border. This became America's first long-distance trail built in 1910. Little did I know then that this relatively short walk would propel me into longer, more wild, and remote landscapes. This is an early mentor of mine, Scott Williamson, on the Pacific Crest Trail in Oregon. After my walk on the Long Trail, I progressed to longer trails. By this time, I had a mentor, Scott Williamson. Scott has walked the Pacific Crest Trail more than a dozen times, which means he spent every summer of his adult life walking this longer and more remote trail. Scott once said to me that his life on the trail made more sense to him than what he did in the off-season to save for his next hike. At the time, I was taken back by this comment. Certainly a lifestyle where one has running water, flush toilets, a hot shower, and a roof over their head would be easier than a life on the trail where one forgoes all the creature comforts of home. This is a photo taken along the Pacific Crest Trail just north of Warner Springs, California. Yet as I continued to walk America's long-distance trails over the next decade, I started to understand my friend's perspective better. Being outside, walking these trails, started to feel more like home to me than my life at home spent working hard to save for my next trip. This is a photo taken along the Grand Enchantment Trail in the Santa Teresa Wilderness in Arizona. In 2011, I walked a little-known unofficial route named the Grand Enchantment Trail. This trail connects many wonderful and rarely visited wilderness areas between Phoenix, Arizona, and Albuquerque, New Mexico. Along this route, I walked through landscapes which literally brought tears of joy to my eyes. I saw remnants of the ancient Mogollon culture and wildlife in numbers I never expected. These animals included mountain lion, elk, black bear, deer, javelina, and fox. I was surprised by how much wildlife I saw along this route compared to many of the national scenic trails I had traversed prior to this. It was along this walk that I decided that going forward, my adventures would focus on maximizing the amount of wildlife to observe. Echoing the creativity of the person who put together the Grand Enchantment Trail, I would use my own creativity to put together my routes. I wouldn't rely anymore on long-distance trails or someone else's idea of where I should go. From this point on, I would choose the route of my own adventures. This is a photo taken at the Bering Sea after having biked, hiked, and paddled from my front door here in Reno. By this time, I had covered over 20,000 miles on foot. I started to look at other ways that I may continue under my own power to traverse some of the wilder landscapes that I thought might provide me with the best opportunities to observe wildlife. In addition to my walking adventures, I had floated over 13,000 miles on rivers in North America. Even on short day trips, river travel proved to be a good way to see lots of animals. I started to think of ways to combine a hiking trip with a paddling component or even bicycle touring. It didn't take long to come up with an adventure I called BLC to the Bering Sea. This was a 5,000-mile bike, hike, paddle from my front door here in Reno to the Bering Sea. The route exceeded my expectations and was more satisfying than all of my prior walks. The amount of wildlife I saw, including my first wild observation of a wolverine, was astounding. The large tracts of untrammeled wilderness were unmatched in my prior travels. On this trip, I started to collect my own data, tracking every wildlife sighting. I recorded the animal's exact location and later put this into Google Earth Maps superimposed on my route. It was interesting to see what kind of terrain was best suited for wildlife and what areas along my route seemed to have the most wildlife. This is the route of the BLC to the Bering Sea. The blue line represents the bicycle leg, and you probably can't see it, but there is a little yellow line that represents the 30 or so miles of hiking, and the magenta line represents the paddling portion of the route along the Yukon River. This is a condensed version of what I did in my early years of adventuring under my own power. I've been doing that now for more than 10 years. Since traveling this way has been rewarding for me, I ask you to consider human-powered adventure at some point during your life. There are obvious health benefits to this kind of travel, but I'm going to discuss the aesthetic, cultural, scientific, financial, and environmental value of exploring our planet under your own power. This is my bike, which I nicknamed the Champ, outside Delta Junction, Alaska last summer. On my bicycle tours, I've been asked many times by motorists if I see more wildlife than they do. The answer is yes. I often talk with RVers in the campgrounds about what wildlife they have seen during the day. Often they haven't seen anything but small creatures like red squirrels. I think this is due to several factors. In a vehicle, you are walled off from the environment you are traveling through. It is too loud and too fast to observe wildlife properly. This is a female black bear with cub walking along the Robert Campbell Highway last summer in Yukon territory. Neither the sow nor her cub were aware of my presence. They were actually kind of wrestling and playing in the road there. On the other hand, on a bicycle, you can roll along silently, listening and looking at a speed where you can observe more. Frequently, during last summer's ride to the Arctic Ocean and back, I was able to roll up with animals completely unaware of my presence. I believe that because I ride along the shoulder of the roads, I can usually see down into the ditches that run along roads better than someone driving from the opposite side of the vehicle. These are some of the youth of Fort Yukon who spent almost an hour drifting along the Yukon River with me when I was floating a couple years back. Human-powered adventure makes one more approachable by others. While on the Yukon River in 2012, I was amazed at how many of the interior Indians, the Athabascans, and eventually Yupik, which are coastal Eskimo people, visited with me. This is Minnie and Arthur Red Fox of Amonic. These are Yupik people who brought me gifts of smoked salmon. I think that this was because I was in a canoe and they would always be in a large motorboat. This put me at a lower level than them with regards to our modes of travel. Unlike climbing off a cruise ship in the Caribbean or a large bus tour to a village, I had no barriers to being approached by others. This solidified my newfound belief that human-powered travel was the best way to get to know these people who are still living off the land much like they have for 15,000 years. This is the return leg of last summer's adventure, which I call the Tippy Top Tour. Each bubble represents a wildlife or roadkill observation I made for a roadkill study that I collected data for. And all the green dots would be animals that are living, and all the red dots would be roadkill that I saw. And it's kind of compressed, there's a lot of them on there. Human-powered adventure proceeds at the perfect speed to collect data for science. Last summer, I took part in my first citizen science project by collecting data for a roadkill survey. This didn't just include dead animals, but every animal I saw, large and small. Traveling by bicycle was the perfect speed for me to see lots of animals, even along busy roadways. It also gave me the element of surprise I mentioned earlier with regards to observing live animals. This is an image that illustrates the record low that Arctic sea ice hit in 2012. Human-powered adventure is an excellent way to observe our warming planet and the impacts our lifestyles are having on it. In 2012, along the Yukon and Yukon-Charlie National Preserve, I observed permafrost melting from the banks of the river. At night in camp, I would hear these loud explosions and wonder what was going on. The next day, I got to see firsthand how quickly the Yukon was eroding its permafrost banks. 2012, Arctic sea ice reached an all-time record low. Could the warming, record-setting Arctic just 250 miles north of me have anything to do with what I was seeing? In my 13,000 miles of river travel and 20 years living in Alaska, I had never seen anything like this. This is the route I took last summer from Reno, Nevada to the Arctic Ocean and back, and I call that the Tippy Top Tour. This brings me to my next point. Human-powered adventure is inexpensive in different ways. What most people spend on a one-week vacation, I can use to finance a summer's worth of human travel. Bicycling through Canada this past summer, a fellow pointed out to his daughter, well, look, honey, he doesn't need to spend all the money we are on gas to go to the same place. My main cost is my time, which since I have structured my life accordingly, I have plenty of. Human-powered adventure is also less taxing on our planet. For example, someone driving a motorhome to Alaska that maybe gets 7 miles to the gallon is going to emit 3.6 metric tons of CO2. This is 3.6 metric tons I am not emitting. This ties right back into what I just mentioned about the impact I have on our planet and what I do to minimize through my choice of human-powered adventure. Human-powered travel is less costly both to you and to our environment. Human-powered adventure along the routes I've chosen recently has caused me to think about the connections between our remaining wild places here in North America. Moving at human-powered speed gives you plenty of time to visually input these landscapes and remember them long after you visited them. For example, this winter when I've been in the Mount Rose Wilderness just above us here, I don't think of it as just a slice of wild country nestled between two urban environments of Reno and Lake Tahoe. I now realize that though the wilderness boundary may be finite, the landscape it connects to goes north all the way to the Arctic Ocean. The Arctic Ocean, to me, no longer seems like a far-off place that I cannot even imagine, but a place which is very real and not very far from my home, since I can ride my bicycle or walk there. What happens there is very real concern to me here in Reno. In addition to pedaling to the Arctic Ocean and back last summer, I was fortunate enough to spend 45 days in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge trapping and banding shorebirds. Human-powered adventure has clued me into the rhythms of our planet. Last spring, when I pedaled north, I watched many large flocks of sandhill cranes migrating to the Arctic. Since I spent time in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge banding birds last summer, it made me wonder if some of the cranes I noticed near Grouse Lake, Oregon, were the same cranes that eventually migrated to the refuge. On my return just 2 days from Reno out near Fort Bidwell, California, I saw the cranes again, but this time migrating south. I became very aware of what their migration entails and the landscapes they move through as well. This is a flock of sandhill cranes migrating south just outside Faro, Yukon territory, and they're way up in the sky there. Lastly, I'd like to add that our human-powered adventures need not be remote, long, or require costly travel to some exotic locale to be worthwhile or beneficial. All of my adventures now begin from my front door and return to my home right here in Reno. I couldn't think of a better place to launch my adventures from. This is Highway 50 just east of Austin, Nevada. We have plenty of lonely highways with excellent shoulders to bike tour on, and hundreds of miles of trails and wilderness areas to walk and paddle in. Much of our state is wild and unpopulated, so there is no reason to overlook what we have right in our own backyard when considering the route of your human-powered adventure. If you would like to see more, enjoy more, and feel more, I recommend human-powered adventure. You will have a better chance of interacting with people who have different realities, worldviews, and an awareness in the natural world than you do. It is also a wonderful opportunity to collect data for science. Should you choose to take your adventure further north, you will see what is happening at the extremes of our rapidly warming planet. Since you will be under your own power and not relying on fossil fuels, you will feel good about what you're doing to minimize your impacts. Who knows what conclusions or observations you may make about the landscapes you choose to move through under your own power. Lastly, you may come to the conclusion that I have, that I am no more entitled to our planet's resources for my livelihood than the very same animals whom I now migrate with. While you're planning your adventure, I encourage you to consider out and back loops. There is no telling what your impressions of home will be upon your return after seeing what you'll see elsewhere. Will you have a different idea of your destination and how close it really is to your home? Do the environmental changes occurring there affect you? You will be in the best position to make those conclusions should you choose to do so under your own power. This is a route I'm currently working on called the Strange Loop. It incorporates the 3 major long-distance trails in America by bicycle between the trailheads. No one has ever linked the 3 trails entirely by human power before. This is roughly a 15,000-mile loop that should take about a year and a half to complete. Best of all, it begins and ends at my front door here in Old Southwest Reno.